If you're not already clued up about the 2025 NFL Draft, you are about to be, because with me today to talk all things NFL Draft related, I'm joined by college football analyst and co-host of the PFF College Football Show, Max Chadwick. Max, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Dom. It's really cool being able to talk to you, dude. And like I said, it's always great talking ball with new people, so I'm excited to talk to you today.
Well, talking ball is exactly what we're going to do, and we're going to start off with some hot takes, because as you well know, the off-season, Max, is where the hot takes really start flying around. We're seeing Matthew Stafford for the 3rd overall pick to the Giants. We're seeing people saying Amon Membu in the top 10, Jackson Dart in the 1st. What is your hottest draft take?
Oh, man. It's tough. I'm getting through, so I'm about almost done with all my offensive prospects so far. Then I'm going to move over to the defensive side of the ball. I think maybe my hottest take is Shedeur Sanders is my personal QB1 for the draft. I think he presents the highest floor of any quarterback in this draft. And I think, we all the time get caught up in the tools because we see guys like, Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes all have extreme success with those tools. And Cam Ward, while he's not have those kind of tools, he does have better tools than Sanders. So that's why I think for a lot of people, he is their QB1. I do think it's a little bit of a gunslinger there with Cam Ward than there isn't with Shedeur Sanders. Sanders is, like I said, he's very accurate. He knows where to go with the football. He reads defenses at a very high level. And I think he does not put the ball in harm's way. I think, there are different types of quarterbacks that work in the NFL. I mean, I'm not comparing him to this guy, but like a Joe Burrow, for example. Burrow does not have the best mobility, does not have the best arm, and yet he's still a top 3 to 4 quarterback in the NFL because of how heady he is and how accurate he is and how amazing he is at reading defenses. That's kind of the mold of Shedeur Sanders, right? And I think for Tennessee at number 1 overall, Brian Callahan's the head coach there. He was Burrow's offensive coordinator in Cincinnati, right? So there even is a quote from Brian Callahan saying, yeah, when I watch Shedeur Sanders, I see a little Burrow in him. Now, again, I'm not comparing him to Burrow. Burrow was one of the greatest quarterbacks we've ever seen in college football, but there's different ways to win at quarterback. So for me, I just think I feel the best about what Shedeur will be in the NFL. I think Cam does have a higher ceiling than him, but Shedeur has a higher floor, which is why I think he's my QB1.
So with Sanders then being your QB1, does that mean that you think the Titans have to take him with the 1st overall pick, or is it more like a QB1 in the sense that, say, Kenny Pickett was a QB1 way back when? And I think Sanders is better than Pickett, don't get me wrong, but just in that sense that it's not a QB1 that you simply have to take with that 1st overall pick, or do you think it is?
No, I don't. I think it's not Pickett bad. It's not like the 2022 class bad, or it's like, dear God, like, I don't know what you do at quarterback. It's not that bad because we do have, like, for example, that 2022 class, I would say is what this year's is without Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward. Like, the top guy in that year's draft was like maybe QB3, and like QB3 and on from this year's draft, I'm like, I'm not touching those guys until the 3rd round. Like, I don't want to take those guys in the 1st round or 2nd round. So I think Shedeur, but again, Shedeur would be QB at best QB4 last year, like at best. Like I don't think he's even coming close to what Caleb Williams or Drake May or Jaden Daniels were for me at least coming out. So they have that caveat, right? Would you take a J.J. McCarthy or Michael Penix Jr. or Bo Nix number 1 overall? That's kind of what we're talking about here with Shedeur and Cam Ward. So it's a good question. Tennessee at number 1, they do need a quarterback. And I do think in an offense like the one Callahan runs is really a good fit for Shedeur. So I do think he could go there and succeed. So I probably would pull the trigger on him at number 1 overall, but I don't love it. There's not, like you said, there is not a Caleb or Drake or Jaden where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm taking that guy number 1 overall without a doubt. It makes it a lot more complicated in this year's draft.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my issue with Sanders is that I kind of see him, because of those lack of physical tools, as never quite being, let's say, like a top 10 NFL quarterback. So, like, I would always be worried about taking that guy with, like, a top 5 pick. But, it's a quarterback-driven league, and if you're in that room and you're not pulling the trigger and Sanders does become the next Joe Burrow, say, well, then you're going to feel the heat a little bit, aren't you?
Exactly, and I think that's the problem is that, okay, you talk about Burrow all you want being that elite of a quarterback. The problem is, like, Burrow is so elite at everything, right? And I think everything but the tools, right? Everything else he has is ridiculously good. And, like, that's the problem is, like, if you want Shedeur to be that level, he also has to be that good at everything else. I don't know if he is. And I think the pocket presence for Shedeur is a problem. I think we've seen it at times at Colorado where he holds onto the ball too long. Listen, the O-line at Colorado was not very good. He also is not an easy quarterback to block for either, to put his offensive line, to give him a little credit there. Like, he breaks pockets that are clean a lot. he sometimes think he's a little bit more mobile than he actually is. So that is a problem. That wasn't a problem with Burrow. So I think that is another thing with Shedeur Sanders too, is like he has to be that level of Burrow good to overcome his tools. If not, then we might be talking about like a Tua Tagovailoa, which is still like a guy who's making $50 million a year, but he's more of like a top 15 quarterback in the NFL. That's probably like, if he's not that level of Burrow good, he could probably be more of like an above average starter in the NFL, which I think is what he probably will be in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, that Shedeur Sanders' mobility, I mean, and the tendency to hold onto the ball. I mean, you saw it in that BYU game, the final game of the season, when he took that massive sack in the red zone to put them out of field goal range. Like, it was, he drifts in the pocket, I find a lot. And I think the Joe Burrow comparison is one that we'll hear a lot, right? And I know you're not saying he is Joe Burrow, but for me, the way I see it is that Joe Burrow is just like one of the most like accurate quarterbacks, like an absolute like precision thrower of the football. Whereas, and that's how he offsets the lack of arm and the lack of athleticism. And I think, you're right, Sanders is going to have to win in that same way. But does he have that top tier accuracy? That's the real difference maker.
Exactly. And like Burrow, again, Shedeur has been incredible his entire career. Burrow put up maybe the greatest season we've ever seen as a passer at LSU, right? Like, we're talking like he and Cam Newton, in my opinion, had the two greatest years at quarterback we've ever seen. Shedeur was never that good, right? So that's why whenever you throw out the Burrow comparisons, like, I get it because that's the play style and that's what you want him to be like, but he's never been that level of good before. Like, I've heard Teddy Bridgewater before for Shedeur Sanders. I've heard Gene Smith for Shedeur Sanders. Like, I could see that as well. And Teddy, before the injuries, was actually a pretty good quarterback. I could see it kind of like that as well. So I understand that the drawback with Shedeur, and that's why, again, I think he's not a slam dunk number one overall pick. But the Cam Ward stuff, there is a little bit of a gunslinger there with Cam Ward. Like, to me, it reminds me a lot of Jordan Love. So Love, Love is a guy that makes unbelievable throws and then makes throws. You're like, dude, what are you even looking at out there? Cam Ward sometimes does the same thing out there. So again, higher ceiling. Like, Jordan Love is again another guy who's a franchise quarterback, and a lot of people think he's a top 10 quarterback. But it's just, I just think there's a floor with Shedeur there that there isn't quite there with Cam Ward right now.
Yeah, I mean, that like crossbody prayer in the Cal game, like you were talking about that the other day on your show. Like, yeah, he got them 25 points up, to come back in the game. But who's the one that put them in that hole to begin with? It was Cam Ward. I mean, the thing is with these two quarterbacks is that I think everyone can agree it's Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, 1, 2. You might disagree. I've got Ward 1, you got Shedeur 1. But I think we can still see what the other one holds. Is there a prospect in this draft that you just don't see it with? Like, I often say that it's almost like the Emperor's New Clothes sometimes in the draft. That, like, you're looking at a guy that's naked up there and everyone's going, oh my God, look how amazing he looks in his clothes. And you're like, no, this guy's, you're almost being like gaslit into believing that someone's amazing. Is there someone where you're like, I just don't see it? Like, I don't see Walter Nolan as a first round prospect at all. But like, is there someone where you're like, guys, what are we doing here?
Yeah, I think there's one guy, and I think he's very talented, but I mean, Dolan and I go mad with the stuff I've been seeing lately. I think Jalon Walker being top 3 or top 5 for people's big boards, dude. It's so much projection. And listen, I've had Dane Brugler on my show before. I think he's one of the smartest guys in the business, but he has a number 3 overall, and like, I think Jalon Walker, I take him like the 2nd or 3rd round. Like, I think he's a guy that, yes, he's a freak. And yes, you're projecting him at edge, but like, to me, you look at him and then you look at a guy like James Pierce Jr. They're both played the SEC. They're both ridiculously athletic. It's not like it's a tools thing, a problem with James Pierce Jr. And then one of them has produced an edge defender, while the other one you're thinking, oh, maybe he can be as good as James Pierce Jr. at edge defender. Like, I don't understand why Jalon Walker is getting, to me, he's getting a lot of like like last year going into the year, Abdul Carter at edge defender, like, oh, I'm very excited by that. We'll see what happens. And he ended up being a superstar. We're kind of treating Jalon Walker the same way, where it's like, oh, he'll just be that good, right? Like, Abdul Carter, I don't think it's very fair to even Jalon Walker to expect that out of him. I think he's a little weird right now. I don't think he's a top 5 prospect or top 10 like I've seen a lot of. I think he might even go in the top 10 of this draft, and I don't agree with that. I think he's more of like a day two guy where I'm thinking, okay, we'll take him. He's going to play edge rusher for us. We got to teach him how to be a full-time edge, and hopefully his athletic tools make him a really good one. In a loaded edge class, and a guy like James Pierce Jr. for me is a top 10 player easily in this draft. I don't understand why Jalon Walker is being thrust up into the top 5 of people's big boards right now. Like, I think it's very, very high for a guy whose his entire scouting report is basically all projection, honestly.
I completely agree with you. I'm a massive James Pierce Jr. guy, and I'll ask you a question about him in a second. But I completely agree. I mean, Walker's kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none kind of vibe. Do you know what I mean? And I saw Daniel Jeremiah had him at 7, I think, in his mock. And obviously he does mocks by not necessarily what he would do, but by kind of keeping his ear to the ground. Like Jalon Walker, that would be insanity. Genuinely, when you talk about there being like Mike Green, James Pierce Jr., like it seems to be that the people that have more of an ear to the ground in these things are lower on James Pierce Jr. and Mike Green, you know, going like the late 20s. I think Mike Green even went like pick 32 to the Chiefs in Daniel Jeremiah's mock or something crazy like that. So you're obviously a big James Pierce Jr. guy, so am I. I absolutely love him. If you're in the draft room for a team in the top 10, like how hard are you selling, like let's say Panthers at 8, how hard are you banging the table for James Pierce Jr. there if, say, Mason Graham's gone and, say, Ted McMillan's gone?
If you're the Carolina Panthers, I think at number 8 overall, that is one of the guys I'm targeting. I think he is a guy. You lose Brian Burns, you traded away Brian Burns to the Giants, and you're looking for your next athletic pass rusher. That's him right there. And with Pierce, he's been, again, this is the Walker versus Pierce debate that I don't understand. He has been ridiculously productive in the SEC for 2 years now as a pass rusher. And the thing with Pierce that I think is even scarier about that he's been a top 3 to 5 pass rusher in college football each of the last 2 years. And yet he's still kind of winning only off athleticism right now. Like, there's not a lot of moves in his tape, which is a bad thing, of course, saying, okay, he's got to develop that. But also you think about it, it's like, dude, he's that freaking good without many moves right now. Like, imagine what he is like when you develop him a little bit more. And the other thing I love about Pierce this year, he was below average as a run defender as a sophomore. I thought he wasn't as strong there. He got stronger this year, and he improved his run defense grades from like a 65 to like an 82. So, like, that's a big jump for him. I think Pierce, with the athletic traits, like his explosiveness off the ball is ridiculous. Like, I think he's got the traits that you want to bet on in the top 10. He has the traits you want to bet on, and he has the production to bet on as well. Like, to me, I think my hot take is I think James Pierce Jr. is closer to Abdul Carter than he is to any other edge in this draft. Like, I really do. I think it's Abdul's number 1 for me for sure, but I think it's 1, 2, and then everyone else after that. I think Pierce is absolutely a top 10 prospect for me right now.
I love James Pierce Jr. I think there's almost an aspect of, because not this time last year, but about like 10 months ago, he was that, like, could he be first overall? And obviously that was a bit, looking back with hindsight, like a 245-pound odd edge rusher is not going to go first overall, right? But like, it's almost like the pendulum swung too far the other way this season, that, you know, people are like, oh, he was meant to be the first overall pick, but obviously he's not first overall pick worthy, but like, he's such a great player, and I think he's kind of being slept on. And for me, Jalon Walker, if he wasn't wearing those Georgia Bulldog red and black, would this guy even really be spoken about in the first round at all? Like, we've seen so many of these kind of guys, haven't we?
No, exactly. And that's another thing too. Like, he and his teammate Michael Williams, another guy that it's a lot of protection. Like, Michael to me is a very much the Trayvon Walker debate, where it's like, okay, the tools are freaky. He's a really good run defender, but he's raw. He's really raw as a pass rusher right now. That is the debate for me right now. Like, I still like Michael, and I still probably would take him in the first round, but he's more the back half of the first round for me than anything else. Pierce, I think, is a slam dunk top 10 to 15 pick. Like, I think if he somehow fell to the Falcons at their pick, like, that would be a phenomenal selection. They've desperately needed help at pass rush for like a decade now, and I think James Pierce Jr. that'd be a dream pick for them. So yeah, man, I'm with you. And actually, you mentioned before the number 1 overall pick stuff. We actually had him as the number 1 overall pick in our way too early mock draft. And I think a lot of people else had him that high too. I got it with it was a weird one, because it was like, there's a lot of guys there's a lot of projection for, but we saw him and what he did as a sophomore in the SEC, and it was like Laiatu was the best pass rusher in college football last year, and Pierce was like number 2 or 3. So we're like, okay, if he could develop a little bit more, and I think that what you said is smart, right? I think what you said is right, where he started off slow, and I think people kind of just, you're like, oh, okay, never mind. James Pierce, not an overall pick. Well, who's next? Like, Abdul Carter, he looks really good. And then as the season went on, he really picked it up and became really good again. I think people are kind of late to, say, oh, wait, Pierce actually ended up having a really good year. Like, the first couple games, he was pretty slow. And then after that, he really picked it up and was one of the best players at edge rusher in the country. That, I think, is maybe what held him back initially, that he didn't start off out of the gate really hot, but he did pick it up a lot as the season went on.
Yeah, I mean, we see all of those guys in the same way, but someone I know that we don't see the same, unfortunately, is Malachi Starks. I'm a big Malachi Starks guy. I know your colleague Trevor Sycamore is a big Malachi Starks guy. He's my 10th. He's Trevor's 7th, ranked player. He was 97th on the PFF 101. I saw that. That didn't get past me.
Okay.
That didn't get. I know that's not how you're ranking them for that. Don't worry. I know it's not a draft big board by any means. And I know he did have a down year. Tell me why I'm wrong to have Malachi Starks that highly.
I don't think you're very wrong at all. I think he is. And again, the 101's different because the 101's just like ranking off how they did that past year. He was still very good, but there's still some things that, I think the one thing I'll say with Malachi Starks is I don't think he's, like, for me, the best safeties I've seen in recent memory in the draft are like Derwin James and Kyle Hamilton. I don't think he's in that grouping, but he's like right at the next level. Like I think he's like at that level where still worth a first round pick. Miami at 13. If Javon Holland does leave in free agency, that's a home run pick for them right there, right? So I think I would be willing to take him in the top 15 probably. I still might even I haven't put together my full big board yet, but he might be a top 15 to 20 player for me. He probably will be. I've seen a lot of takes a Nick Emmanwori from South Carolina is safety one for some people. I don't really understand that. I think Malachi Starks is better, so I'm with you there. But like, I think a lot of people, I think it's slowed down now, which is good. But I think initially people were talking about him as like a generational prospect. If you want that, I think Caleb Downs next year is the guy for you. Like that's the guy that I'm saying. That's the Derwin James, Kyle Hamilton levels is what Caleb Downs is. I think Starks is right below that, but you're right. I mean, he is a top 10 to 15 player probably in this draft, though.
I think that's such a great shout out from you. Like so watching Caleb Downs play for Ohio State this year and watching how he just like took that defense to another level as a player that, usually from that position, you don't do that. Even at the college level where being athletic is even more valuable than the NFL, usually it's defensive lineman or, someone like that, basically not a safety and not one that kind of sits in that nether realm between the linebackers and the actual traditional safeties, right? Like I loved Caleb Downs, and I think watching Downs in Ohio State does make you kind of look at Starks, who doesn't have that same physicality, right? Which like a Derwin James or a Kyle Hamilton has. So I think that's like a very fair knock on Starks.
Yeah, exactly. And I hate to say this because like Starks is phenomenal, right? He has been that way his entire career. But I think he's just a really, really, really good safety that's worth a first round pick. I think why I was maybe a little bit lower, and when I was talking about him was like, okay, he's not the generational guys. Like he's not the Hamilton or the Derwin James. And you're right, the fact that Caleb Downs was this freaking good too, it kind of you look at Starks in a different light. You're like, okay, maybe it's not that. Like Caleb Downs, just full disclosure, when we put together our big board for next year, he might be the number one overall player. Like he's that good, and it's also like a weird year in college football next year. There's not that many like top end guys. You're like, oh yeah, that guy's gonna be a top 5 pick or whatever. Downs to me is like that. Like you can see Caleb Downs be a top 5 pick at safety, which is just ridiculous. Starks is more of like a top 15 to 20 pick, which even for a safety though, that's really good considering they don't really go that high usually. I still think he's a phenomenal player. I think he's more of like the top 15 to 20 pick than he is more of a top 10 one in my opinion.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's very fair. And what I wanted to ask as well is about the running back class. Obviously, loads of eyes on Ashton Jeanty. Just an insane season from him. I saw you literally just tweet before you came on that Ashton Jeanty after contact 1,970 yards after contact. Like that, him after contact would be the second best running back behind Ashton Jeanty. Like just insane. But even for as amazing as Jeanty has been, do you think that some teams might look at the running back class and say, you know what, Jeanty's fantastic, but we could still get a Travion Henderson, a Marion Hampton, any of those guys, Cam Scatterby maybe even later than that. Do we hold fire on a running back, even if it's a generational one, if we want to use that word, for Ashton Jeanty? Or do they just go, you know what, we're going to take the blue chip guy and we're going to ride off into the sunset and be happy with that?
Yeah, it's a really hard conversation, yeah, and you're right, because I would put Jeanty. We actually just did our running back episode today, like an hour or two ago, and we were talking about Dalton and I were talking about, okay, he's up there. Like the question is not is Jeanty RB1. The question is where does he stack up against Bijan Robinson and Saquon Barkley and Ezekiel Elliott and whoever else you want to throw out, like Adrian Peterson, whoever. He's like that kind of class, right? And you're talking about like Saquon and Bijan are, at least for me, the two best running back prospects I can remember. And they're two of the 3 or 4 best running backs in the NFL right now. So it's like those guys hit. And running back, it is pretty easy to scout running backs compared to other positions. We're like, okay, you know who's a guy and who's not, right? So Jeanty is a guy for sure. It's it's so tough because it's tough for me to say, okay, if you got a Saquon Barkley or Bijan talent, why not take him? But you're right. This is one of the most loaded classes I can remember. I mean, I think Omarion Hampton might be a top 32 player, right? Quinshon Judkins is phenomenal. Caleb Johnson in a zone scheme would be great. Cam Scatter was a maniac. Like, I love that guy. There's so many guys in this draft. And like, for me, if you run a gap-heavy scheme, Damian Martinez is phenomenal. Like, I think he could be a guy that could be a really, really good running back in the NFL. And I think he's getting slept on a little bit in this class right now. There's like 15 to 20 running backs, I think, in this draft that are going to make serious impacts at whoever they go to. So there is an argument of saying, okay, if you don't want to spend a top 10 or 15 pick on Jeanty, you could wait and get a guy in day 2 and stack that up really well. So that is definitely an argument, but at the same time, Jeanty is in that class with Bijan and Saquon. And if you want to pass on that guy for a guy who could be a really good running back in the NFL, but maybe not a top 5 one, that's on you, right? So it'd be tough. If you have a glaring need at running back, like the Cowboys or someone like that, I might be like, let's go get Ashton Jeanty. Like, let's go get that guy and be set there. But if you're a team that, like, could definitely use a running back, but you don't, like, desperately need one, you need other positions a lot more, then I'd say, okay, let's wait till day 2 or day 3 and grab one or multiple of the really good running backs in this class. That's probably how I see it. So if you desperately need a running back, and that's kind of the biggest need right now, you take Ashton Jeanty, you don't think twice about it. But if it's just a need and not one of your top needs, then I would say, okay, let's wait for the other guys in the draft.
It's interesting because obviously off the back of the Eagles' Super Bowl win and Saquon's, just insane season, it seems like the running back pendulum again has swung again backwards towards kind of like, okay, right, these guys, we don't want to overpay for them, especially when they get older, but if you have a good team that's kind of like ready to take the next step, then someone like Jeanty could really help your team do that. My question then, my follow-up is, who's your RB2? Because I love Travion Henderson. Like I absolutely love. I think he's like. I just saw a rep of him, but I was just watching some tape before. He had a chip block on Mason Graham and just floored him. Took the air out of him. And I know that pass protection is a massive reason as to why a lot of rookie running backs don't see the field or aren't on the field as much as perhaps they could be if they were really good in pass pro. So who is then your running back 2?
I have Omarion Hampton from North Carolina. I think his combination of size, he might have, and I'm saying this even with Ashton Jeanty in this class, I think he might have the strongest lower half of any running back in this draft. Like, he is just a tank when he gets going, and he can get going, man. Like, he is a guy that is really, really fast, explosive, and just physical. I mean, we interviewed Mac Brown a couple years ago, the former UNC head coach, and he goes, dude, our DBs hate tackling Omarion Hampton. Hate it. Like, he's a nightmare. And I bet you every DB in the country is tackling Omarion Hampton, right? So I have him RB2 right now. I like Travion Henderson a lot. The only thing that kind of scares me why I had Henderson, I think I had him 6, is because the top 5 for me of Jeanty, Hampton, Scatterboo, Caleb Johnson, and Quinshon Judkins, I can see those guys being bell cow running backs. Henderson, when he has to be a bell cow, he's gotten hurt, right? He missed 3 games last year, and he missed 5 games the year before when he was like the guy. When Judkins transferred in, he was allowed to be like a 50-50 guy, and he was freaking phenomenal at doing that. And I think that's kind of the role, and which is still great. Like, look at the Detroit Lions right now with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. You have those guys splitting the touches, and they're both phenomenal, right? You're not taking away from either of them. I want Henderson in that kind of offense. I don't want him saying, okay, you're our guy for 17 games a year. I just don't think his body's going to hold up over the course of a 17-game season. But I'm with you, though. He could be a really, really effective player if he's in a backfield where there's at least one other guy that could at least split the touch with them.
Yeah, I mean, I also love Omarion Hampton. I mean, I saw him in person when I went to Georgia Tech, UNC 2 years ago, and Georgia Tech had the upset, and we still on the field. It was fun. It was an amazing game. It was also my introduction to Drake May as well. But Omarion Hampton, I mean, this running back class is just absolutely like stacked to the eyeballs. Like Cam Scatterboo, someone that might obviously go later, but like he could make who doesn't want a guy like that on their football team, really? Like you just know, like Dan Campbell is foaming at the mouth for someone like that. Like just an absolute tone set. How high would you take Scatterboo?
I have him 3rd. I have him 3rd in the running back class, and which might sound crazy considering how athletic some of the other guys are, but like, dude, he's a psychopath. Like I watch his tape, and he's actually more athletic than people give him credit for. Now the long speed is an issue, right? He's not going to run away for a 60 or 70 yard touchdown, but in between the tackles, like his footwork is really quick. And like I said, he just breaks every tackle. Like it's just, you cannot bring that guy down. And I think there is something to be said about a mentality. Like Cam Scatterbo is not going to fail because he's not going to let himself fail. Like he is a true maniac. Like if he needs to play special teams for you, he'll play special teams and he'll give his heart out for special teams, right? He's one of the rare guys, I think, nowadays you can say he will literally die in the football field. That's probably the preferred way for him to go out, is to die in the football field. I love that guy, man. And also, he's like the best receiving back in the maybe country over the last couple of years, too. Like, he's a really good receiver. I mean, he had an unreal catch down the sideline against Texas in that quarterfinal round. Like, I know the athletic traits maybe aren't as good as, say, Jeanty or Henderson or Hampton or whoever else, but, like, you just watch that guy play football. He is a football player, and I think that is the kind of guy that is gonna work in the NFL because he just gets it. It feels like.
Yeah, I mean the immeasurables with Scatterbo is just like off the charts, man. Like you want to run through a wall when you're watching him play, like let alone being on the field with him. But Max, thank you so much for your time. This has been absolutely fantastic. I know you're a busy man in high demand, so that's all we've unfortunately got time for. But when people want to check out you and your work, where can they find you?
Yeah, it's all at PFF.com, and I host the PFF College Football Show with Dalton, and I'm also on the PFF NFL Show a good amount now, too. So it's all available on YouTube or in your podcast, and also all my articles live at PFF.com.
And everyone should definitely check them out because they are absolutely brilliant, as are the shows. Max, I really appreciate you coming on. Hopefully we can do this again before the draft. Thanks again.
Oh, yeah, Dom. Thanks, man.